The wire-rimmed spectacles slipped down Delilah Kane's nose as she stumbled over a loose plank on the wooden sidewalk, and the heavy medical tome she carried went flying into the dusty street of Kelton, Utah, landing with a thud that drew the attention of every passerby on that sweltering August afternoon in 1882. "Well, would you look at that?" Martha Simmons sneered from beneath her parasol, her voice carrying across the street loud enough for half the town to hear. The schoolmarm dropped another one of her precious books. "Tell me, Miss Kane, when are you going to realize that no man in this territory wants a woman who reads more than she cooks?" Delilah felt her cheeks burn as she bent to retrieve the book, her glasses sliding further down her nose. She pushed them back up with one finger, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing, though it never failed to draw commentary from the women of Kelton. At 22 years old, she had already resigned herself to spinsterhood in a town where most girls married by 18. Her love of literature and her determination to educate herself in medicine, despite having no formal training beyond what she could glean from books, marked her as peculiar at best and unmarriageable at worst. "At least I can read, Martha," Delilah muttered under her breath, but loud enough that the other woman heard. Martha's face turned an ugly shade of red, and her companion, Sarah Jenkins, gasped with theatrical outrage. "Did you hear what she said to me?" Martha turned to the small crowd that had gathered. "This is exactly why decent women avoid her. She thinks she is better than everyone else with her books and her airs. My Herald says no cowboy worth his salt would ever court a woman who wears spectacles and talks like a man." Delilah clutched the dusty book to her chest, trying to ignore the stares and whispers. She had heard it all before. The women of Kelton saw her as a threat or a curiosity, and the men saw her as too educated, too plain, too bookish to bother with. She had exactly 3 friends in this town: the elderly shopkeeper who ordered her books from back east, the circuit preacher who appreciated her help teaching the youngest children to read, and her own stubborn pride. She turned on her heel and walked quickly toward the small cabin she rented on the edge of town, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. The medical tome pressed against her ribs felt heavier with each step, as if absorbing all the humiliation of the afternoon. She had saved for 6 months to afford this particular book, and now its pages were crinkled and dirty. Just like everything else in her life, something she treasured had been damaged by this unforgiving place. The sun beat down mercilessly as she made her way past the saloon, the general store, and the marshal's office. Kelton was a small railroad town, one of many scattered across the Utah Territory, serving as a stopping point for travelers and a hub for the surrounding ranches. The Great Salt Lake Desert stretched out beyond the town in shimmering waves of heat, and the mountains rose in the distance like the edges of a prison. Delilah had arrived here 2 years ago, hired as the schoolteacher when the previous one had married, and moved to Salt Lake City. She had thought it would be an adventure, a chance to make her mark. Instead, she had found only loneliness and contempt. As she rounded the corner near the livery stable, she collided with something solid and warm. Strong hands caught her arms, steadying her before she could fall backward. The medical book tumbled from her grasp once more, and Delilah looked up into the face of a man she had never seen before. He was tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard work and a life spent outdoors. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and fell slightly long beneath a worn hat that had seen better days. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, gray as storm clouds and currently fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. A few days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw, and dust covered his clothes, suggesting he had been traveling. "Apologies, miss," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. "I should have been watching where I was walking." "No, it was my fault," Delilah stammered, suddenly aware that his hands were still on her arms. She felt the warmth of his touch even through the fabric of her sleeves, and something about the gentle strength in his grip made her skin tingle in a way she had never experienced. "I was not paying attention." He released her and bent to pick up the book, and Delilah found herself studying the way his shoulders moved, the capable strength in his hands as he brushed the dust from the cover. When he straightened and read the title, his eyebrows rose. "Gray's Anatomy," he read aloud, and Delilah braced herself for the inevitable mockery. Instead, he looked at her with what appeared to be genuine interest. "Are you studying medicine?" The question was so unexpected that Delilah blinked several times before answering. "I am trying to educate myself," she said carefully. "Kelton does not have a doctor, and I thought perhaps if I learned enough, I could at least help with minor injuries and illnesses. But I have no formal training, of course. I am just the schoolteacher." "Just the schoolteacher," he repeated, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It was not a mocking smile, but something warmer, almost admiring. "A woman who teaches children and studies medicine in her spare time, that is remarkable." Delilah felt her heart skip a beat. She searched his face for signs of sarcasm or jest, but found only sincerity. "You do not think it is strange that I would presume to learn such things? I think it is exactly what this territory needs," he said, extending the book toward her. "Smart women who are not afraid to learn and help their communities. Too many towns out here suffer because they lack proper medical care. Anyone willing to study and prepare themselves for that responsibility should be praised, not criticized." Their fingers brushed as she took the book from him, and Delilah felt a jolt of electricity shoot up her arm. She pulled back quickly, hugging the tome to her chest once more. "Thank you," she managed to say. "That is very kind of you to say, Mr. Porter Martin," he supplied, removing his hat in a gesture of politeness that seemed natural rather than forced. "I just arrived in town about an hour ago. I am looking to speak with the land office about purchasing some property for ranching." "Delilah Kane," she replied, and then added without quite knowing why, "Most people just call me Miss Kane. I teach at the schoolhouse." Porter's smile broadened, transforming his weathered face into something almost handsome. "Miss Kane," he said, testing the name as if savoring it. "It is a pleasure to meet you. I hope you will not think me too forward if I say that meeting someone who values education and self-improvement is exactly what I had hoped to find in a town like this." Before Delilah could respond, a harsh voice cut through the air behind them. "Porter Martin, is that you?" They both turned to see a man approaching from the direction of the saloon. He was short and stocky, with a face that had been handsome once but was now marked by dissipation and bitterness. His clothes were expensive but poorly maintained, and there was a swagger in his walk that spoke of arrogance. Porter's expression cooled, though he remained polite. "Harold Simmons, I had heard you settled out here." So this was Martha's husband, Delilah realized. Harold Simmons owned one of the larger ranches outside town and had a reputation for sharp business dealings and a sharper temper. She had kept her distance from him, sensing something unpleasant beneath his veneer of charm. "Settled and thriving," Harold said, his gaze flicking dismissively over Delilah before returning to Porter. "What brings you to Kelton? Last I heard, you were trying your luck in Nevada." "I am looking to establish my own ranch," Porter replied evenly. "I have been working and saving for the past 5 years, and I am ready to build something permanent." Harold laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "A ranch? In this territory? You always did have big dreams, Martin, but dreams do not pay the bills and the good land around here is already claimed. You would be better off hiring on as a ranch hand like you have been doing. Some men are meant to work for others, not to build their own empires." Delilah saw Porter's jaw tighten, but his voice remained calm. "I appreciate your concern, Harold, but I am confident I can make it work. Now, if you will excuse me, I was having a conversation with Miss Kane here before you interrupted." Harold's eyes shifted to Delilah again, and this time there was a calculating look in them that made her uncomfortable. "Miss Kane, the schoolmarm with all the books." "I am surprised you would waste your time, Martin. My wife tells me Miss Kane here thinks she is too good for the men of Kelton. Spends all her time with her nose in books instead of learning to be a proper wife." "Then the men of Kelton are fools," Porter said quietly, but with an edge that made Harold's smile falter. "A woman who improves her mind and seeks to help others is worth 10 who only care about appearances and gossip. Good day, Harold." He turned his back on the other man deliberately, a calculated insult that made Harold's face redden with anger. For a moment, Delilah thought Harold might say something more, but instead he spun on his heel and stalked away, his shoulders rigid with fury. "I apologize for that," Porter said once Harold was out of earshot. "Harold and I have known each other since we were boys back in Kansas. He has always had a talent for making others feel small so he can feel big. I should not have let him speak to you that way." "You defended me," Delilah said softly, still processing what had just happened. No one had ever stood up for her like that before. "Thank you." "No thanks necessary," Porter replied. "I only spoke the truth." He glanced up at the sun, which was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. "I should let you get on with your day, Miss Kane, but I hope I might see you again while I am in town. Perhaps you could tell me more about Kelton and the surrounding area. It would help me make informed decisions about where to look for land." "I would like that," Delilah heard herself say, and was rewarded with another of those warm smiles that seemed to light up his entire face. "Excellent. I will be staying at the boarding house near the general store. Maybe we could meet for coffee tomorrow afternoon if you are free." Delilah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Porter tipped his hat to her once more and then walked away toward the land office, leaving her standing in the dusty street with her medical book clutched to her chest, and her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the heat. She walked the rest of the way home in a daze, her mind replaying every moment of the encounter. Porter Martin had called her remarkable. He had defended her to Harold Simmons without hesitation. He had not mocked her glasses or her books, but instead had seemed genuinely interested in what she was trying to accomplish. It seemed too good to be true, and yet it had happened. The cabin she rented was small and sparsely furnished, but it was hers. She had decorated it with the few possessions she valued. Her collection of books arranged neatly on a shelf she had built herself. A photograph of her parents who had died of influenza when she was 18, and a quilt her mother had made that covered the narrow bed. It was not much, but it was the first place that had ever truly belonged to her. She set the medical book carefully on the small table and removed her glasses to clean them with the edge of her apron. Without them, the world became a blur of shapes and colors, but she had learned long ago how to function in that soft-edged reality when necessary. She had been wearing spectacles since she was 10 years old, when a kind doctor in Chicago had diagnosed her poor vision and convinced her parents to have lenses made for her. The glasses had opened up a whole new world, allowing her to read without strain and see the details of life that others took for granted. But they had also marked her as different, especially after she moved west following her parents' deaths. As she prepared a simple dinner of beans and bread, Delilah allowed herself to think about Porter Martin. There was something about him that drew her, beyond his obvious physical appeal. He had a quiet confidence, a sense of purpose that she recognized because she felt it in herself. He had dreams and was willing to work hard to achieve them. And he had looked at her not with pity or disdain, but with respect and interest. She ate her meal slowly, watching through the window as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. The desert had a stark beauty that she had come to appreciate, even if she had not yet learned to love it. Kelton was harsh and unforgiving, much like many of its residents, but there were moments of grace to be found if you looked closely enough. That night, as she lay in bed with her mother's quilt pulled up to her chin, Delilah allowed herself to hope. Perhaps Porter Martin's arrival was a sign that her luck was changing. Perhaps not all men in the West saw education and ambition in a woman as defects to be mocked. Perhaps she had finally met someone who could see her for who she truly was, not just what she lacked. The next morning, Delilah woke with a sense of anticipation that was both exciting and terrifying. She dressed carefully in her best day dress, a simple blue cotton that she usually reserved for Sundays, and spent extra time arranging her dark hair so that it fell in neat waves around her face. She polished her glasses until they sparkled and checked her reflection in the small mirror above her washstand. She would never be beautiful in the conventional sense, she knew. Her features were too strong, her chin too determined, her figure too slim for current fashions. But with the morning light streaming through the window and hope brightening her eyes, she thought she looked almost pretty. The morning passed slowly as she went about her usual Saturday chores. She swept the cabin, washed her laundry and hung it on the line behind the house, and spent an hour reviewing her lesson plans for the coming week. But her mind kept wandering to the afternoon and her planned meeting with Porter. At 1:30, she walked into town, her heart beating fast with nervous energy. The boarding house was easy to find, a 2-story building that also served meals to non-residents for a small fee. As she approached, she saw Porter waiting outside, leaning against the porch railing with his hat pushed back on his head. He straightened when he saw her, and the smile that crossed his face made her stomach flutter. "Miss Kane," he said, moving to meet her. "I was hoping you would come." "I said I would," Delilah replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded despite her nerves. "Not everyone keeps their word," Porter observed. "I have learned not to assume." He gestured toward the door. "Mrs. Henderson, who runs the boarding house, makes excellent coffee. Shall we?" They settled at a small table near the window, and Mrs. Henderson brought them coffee and slices of apple pie without being asked. The older woman gave Delilah a long look that was more curious than judgmental, and Delilah found herself grateful for small mercies. "So," Porter said once they were alone, "tell me about Kelton. How long have you been teaching here?" "2 years," Delilah replied, wrapping her hands around the warm coffee cup. "I came after my parents died. I had been helping teach at a small school in Illinois, and when I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Utah Territory, it seemed like a fresh start." "Has it been what you hoped for?" Delilah considered the question carefully. "In some ways, yes. The children are eager to learn, for the most part, and I have the freedom to teach as I see fit within reason. But it is a difficult town for someone like me. The people here value conformity and tradition. A woman who reads extensively and has ambitions beyond marriage and motherhood is viewed with suspicion." Porter nodded slowly. "I can imagine. The West attracts people seeking freedom and opportunity, but that does not always translate into open minds." He took a sip of his coffee. "What drew you to medicine? That is not a common interest for teachers." "My mother was often ill," Delilah explained, feeling the familiar ache that always accompanied thoughts of her parents. We spent a great deal of time with doctors, and I watched them work. I began to read medical texts out of curiosity, and then that curiosity became a genuine passion. After my parents died, I wished desperately that I had known more, had been able to do more to help them. I know that is probably foolish. Influenza killed thousands that year, and even trained physicians could not stop it. But I thought that if I educated myself, perhaps I could help others in the future. That is not foolish, Porter said firmly. That is one of the most admirable things I have ever heard. You took your grief and pain and transformed it into a desire to help others. That takes tremendous strength of character. Delilah felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back quickly. Thank you, she whispered. Most people think I am wasting my time or that I have ideas above my station. Most people are small-minded, Porter replied, and they fear what they do not understand. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those storm-gray eyes. Can I tell you something, Miss Kane? I came to Kelton because I heard it was a growing town with opportunities for ranchers. But I also came because I was tired of working for other men, tired of having no control over my own future. I have been a ranch hand since I was 15 years old, and I am good at what I do, but I want more than that. I want land of my own, cattle of my own, a legacy to build. And I want a partner who understands that ambition, who has dreams of her own that she is not afraid to pursue. Delilah's breath caught in her throat. Are you saying? I am saying that meeting you yesterday felt like fate, Porter interrupted gently. I know that sounds foolish. We barely know each other. But when I saw you standing there with your glasses and that heavy medical book, when I heard you talk about trying to educate yourself to help others, something in my chest just knew. You are exactly what I have been searching for. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility and promise. Delilah felt as if the world had tilted slightly on its axis, rearranging itself into a new and unfamiliar configuration. This man, this stranger she had met only yesterday, was saying things she had never dared to hope anyone would say to her. I do not know what to say, she admitted. You do not have to say anything right now, Porter replied. I know I am moving fast. But I learned a long time ago that life is uncertain and opportunities are fleeting. When you find something good, you hold on to it. When you meet someone special, you tell them so. He reached across the table, and after a moment's hesitation, Delilah placed her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, and his fingers closed around hers with a gentleness that belied his strength. I would like to court you properly, Miss Kane, to spend time getting to know you better, and if you are willing, I would like to see where this connection between us might lead. Delilah looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. She saw sincerity there and hope and something else that made her heart race. I would like that very much, Mr. Martin. Porter, he corrected with a smile. I think we are past formalities, do not you? Porter, she repeated, and was rewarded with a squeeze of her hand. And you should call me Delilah. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, the conversation flowing as naturally as a river. Porter told her about growing up in Kansas, the son of farmers who had lost everything to drought and debt. He spoke of leaving home at 15 to work on ranches across Kansas, Colorado, and Nevada, learning everything he could about cattle, horses, and land management. He had saved nearly every penny he earned, living frugally and working extra jobs whenever possible, all with the goal of eventually buying his own spread. Delilah shared her own story in greater detail, talking about her childhood in Illinois, her parents' bookshop that had barely earned enough to keep them fed, and her love of learning that had been encouraged by her father and indulged by her mother despite their poverty. She spoke of the grief that had nearly consumed her after their deaths, and how coming west had felt like both an escape and a penance. "A penance?" Porter asked, his brow furrowing. "What could you possibly need to atone for?" "I was not there when they died," Delilah said quietly. "I was teaching at a school across town, and by the time someone came to fetch me, it was too late. My mother had already passed, and my father died within the hour. I keep thinking that if I had been there, if I had known more about medicine, perhaps I could have saved them." Porter was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "Delilah, listen to me. Influenza is a killer, plain and simple. Even the best doctors with the most advanced training lose patients to it every year. You cannot blame yourself for not having knowledge you had no way to possess at the time." "Logically, I know you are right," Delilah admitted, "but logic and emotion do not always align." "No," Porter agreed, "they do not. But perhaps over time, you can learn to forgive yourself for something that was never your fault to begin with." They were the last patrons to leave the boarding house dining room, and Mrs. Henderson shooed them out with a knowing smile and a wink that made Delilah blush. Porter walked her home through the dusty streets of Kelton, and Delilah found herself intensely aware of his presence beside her. He was tall enough that she had to look up slightly to see his face, and his stride was long, but he adjusted it to match her pace without seeming to think about it. When they reached her cabin, Porter stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "Thank you for spending the afternoon with me," he said. "It has been the best day I have had in longer than I can remember." "For me as well," Delilah replied honestly. "When will I see you again?" "Would tomorrow be too soon? There is a church service in the morning, and I thought perhaps we could attend together, if you are willing to be seen with me publicly." Delilah thought about what that would mean. Kelton was a small town, and gossip spread faster than wildfire. If she attended church with Porter, everyone would know by Monday morning that she was being courted. There would be talk, speculation, probably unkind comments from women like Martha Simmons. But as she looked up at Porter's hopeful face, she found that she did not care. "I would be honored," she said. Porter's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then I will meet you here at 9 tomorrow morning. Sleep well, Delilah. You too, Porter." She watched him walk away until he turned the corner and disappeared from sight, then went inside her cabin feeling as if she were floating several inches above the floor. She prepared for bed mechanically, her mind too full of the day's events to focus on mundane tasks. As she lay in the darkness, she allowed herself to imagine a future that just yesterday had seemed impossible. A future where she was not alone, where her ambitions were supported rather than mocked, where love might actually be possible. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of day that made even the desert seem beautiful. Delilah dressed in her best outfit, a dark green dress that her mother had made for her before she died. It was slightly out of fashion now, but it fit well, and the color brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes. She arranged her hair carefully, pinning it up in a style that was both practical and flattering, and made sure her glasses were spotless. Porter arrived exactly at 9, looking freshly scrubbed and wearing a clean shirt and vest that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His hair was still damp from washing, and he smelled faintly of soap and leather. He offered her his arm with a formal gallantry that made her smile, and together they walked toward the small church that served Kelton's faithful. The reaction as they entered the church together was immediate and electric. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, and heads turned to stare. Delilah kept her chin up and her eyes forward, acutely aware of Porter's solid presence beside her. They took seats near the middle of the church, and gradually the whispers resumed, washing over them like waves. Martha Simmons, seated several rows ahead with her husband Harold, turned to stare openly, her mouth hanging slightly open in shock. Harold's expression was darker, his eyes narrowed as he watched Porter help Delilah into the pew. Delilah caught the look that passed between husband and wife and felt a chill of apprehension, but Porter seemed unconcerned. He settled beside her and opened the hymnal they would share, his shoulder pressed warmly against hers. The service was led by Reverend Thomas, the circuit preacher who visited Kelton twice a month. He was an elderly man with kind eyes and a booming voice that seemed incongruous with his small frame. His sermon was about loving thy neighbor and showing compassion to those different from ourselves, and Delilah could not help but feel he had chosen the topic deliberately after witnessing their entrance. After the service ended, several people approached them as they stood in the churchyard. Most were merely curious, offering polite greetings and questioning looks. But a few were openly friendly, including the shopkeeper who ordered Delilah's books, a man named Samuel Wright. "Miss Kane, Mr. Martin," Samuel said, shaking Porter's hand vigorously. "I wanted to welcome you to Kelton, sir. Any man who appreciates a woman of learning is all right in my book. Miss Kane here is one of my best customers, always ordering the most interesting volumes." "I can imagine," Porter replied warmly. "Delilah has told me about your help in acquiring books for her. That is a valuable service in a town this remote." "Happy to do it," Samuel said. "Education is the foundation of civilization, I always say. We need more people who understand that." He tipped his hat to Delilah. "You picked a good one, Miss Kane. I can tell quality when I see it." As Samuel walked away, Martha Simmons materialized at Delilah's elbow, her face a mask of false sweetness. "Miss Kane, how surprising to see you with an escort. And Mr. Martin, I had no idea you were interested in our little schoolteacher. My Harold tells me you two are old acquaintances. We knew each other years ago," Porter said evenly. "And I am very interested in Miss Kane, as you put it. She is a remarkable woman." Martha's smile tightened. "How quaint. I suppose some men do prefer the bookish type, though I cannot imagine why. A man needs a wife who can manage a household, not one who fills her head with medical nonsense." "Medical knowledge is hardly nonsense," Porter replied, his voice taking on an edge. "And from what Delilah has told me, she is already helping people in this town with their ailments, even without formal training. That seems like exactly the kind of woman any sensible man would want as a wife." Martha's face flushed an ugly red. "Well," she sputtered, "I never—" "Harold, did you hear what Mr. Martin just said?" Harold had been standing slightly behind his wife, and now he stepped forward with a tight smile. "I heard. Martin always did have unconventional tastes, but then again, he also always had big dreams that never quite panned out. Tell me, Porter, have you had any luck with the land office? Found any property that suits your ambitions?" "As a matter of fact, I have several promising prospects," Porter replied coolly. "I will be riding out tomorrow to survey them more closely." "Is that so?" Harold's smile grew sharper. "Well, good luck to you. The ranching business is not as easy as some folks think, especially for those starting from nothing. But I suppose you will learn that soon enough." Porter's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Reverend Thomas approached and greeted them warmly. "Miss Kane, Mr. Martin, how wonderful to see you both. Mr. Martin, I understand you are looking to establish a ranch in our area." "That is my hope," Porter confirmed, visibly relaxing as he turned away from Harold. "Excellent, excellent. We can always use more good people in this community. And Miss Kane, I wanted to thank you again for your help with the children's reading lessons. The youngest ones have improved dramatically under your tutelage." "It is my pleasure, Reverend," Delilah said, grateful for his intervention. "The children are eager to learn." They spoke with the Reverend for several more minutes before finally extricating themselves from the churchyard crowd. As they walked back toward Delilah's cabin, Porter let out a long breath. "I apologize for Harold," he said. "He has always been competitive, but he seems to have grown bitter over the years." "He was not wrong, though, was he?" Delilah asked quietly. "Ranching is difficult, especially starting out. Are you certain you can make it work?" Porter stopped walking and turned to face her. "I am not certain of anything in this life, Delilah, except that I have to try. I have spent 5 years working for other men, learning their methods, making their ranches successful. I know cattle, I know horses, and I know land. But more than that, I know how to work hard and how to persevere when things get difficult. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," Delilah said softly. "I was not questioning your abilities, Porter. I just worry. Harold seems like the type of man who holds grudges, and he clearly resents you for some reason." "Harold resents anyone who might be more successful than him," Porter replied. "When we were boys, his family had money and mine did not. He never let me forget it. I learned early on that people like Harold do not change. They just find new reasons to feel superior." He reached out and gently adjusted her glasses, which had slipped down her nose. "But I do not care what Harold thinks. I care what you think, and I hope you believe in me, even if others do not." "I do believe in you," Delilah said, and realized it was true. There was something solid and trustworthy about Porter, a core of integrity that she recognized instinctively. "I think you are going to build something wonderful here." They spent the afternoon together, walking along the edge of town and talking about their dreams for the future. Porter described the kind of ranch he wanted to create, not just a commercial venture but a real home, a place where family could gather, and where the land would be respected and cared for properly. Delilah shared her hope of eventually opening a small clinic where she could treat patients, perhaps even training others in basic medical care. "We could do it together," Porter said at one point, his eyes distant as he gazed at the mountains. "Build something that lasts. A ranch that is also a home, with space for your medical work. Children who grow up understanding the value of both hard work and education." Delilah's heart stuttered at the mention of children. It was a future she had barely allowed herself to imagine, and hearing Porter speak of it so casually, so naturally, made it suddenly seem possible. "Real. You are thinking very far ahead," she said, trying to keep her voice light despite the emotion welling up in her chest. "I am," Porter admitted, turning to look at her. "Because when I look at you, Delilah, I see my future. I know it is fast, probably too fast by normal standards, but nothing about my life has ever been normal. I have been on my own since I was 15, and I learned to trust my instincts because they were all I had. Those instincts are telling me that you are the woman I am meant to spend my life with." Delilah removed her glasses and wiped at her eyes, which had filled with tears. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "It terrifies me, how much I feel after knowing you for such a short time, but I cannot deny it. When I am with you, I feel like myself in a way I never have before, like I do not have to hide or apologize for who I am." Porter pulled her into his arms, and Delilah went willingly, resting her head against his chest and feeling the steady beat of his heart. They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's embrace while the sun beat down and the desert wind whispered through the sage brush. Over the following weeks, Porter and Delilah fell into a pattern of spending every available moment together. Porter completed his negotiations with the land office and purchased a section of land about 5 miles outside Kelton, a beautiful spot where a creek ran year-round and the grass grew thick enough to support cattle. It was not a large parcel by ranching standards, but it was enough to start, and the price had been fair. He began the hard work of building, starting with a small cabin that would serve as his home until he could afford something larger. Delilah visited whenever she could, bringing him lunch on weekends and watching with admiration as the structure slowly took shape. Porter was skilled with his hands, she discovered, capable of creating straight walls and tight joints with only the most basic tools. "My father taught me," he explained one Saturday afternoon as they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree near the creek. "He said a man should always know how to build things, because you never know when that skill might save your life." "Your father sounds like he was wise," Delilah observed. "He was," Porter agreed, his expression growing distant. "He just had terrible luck. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong weather. But he taught me and my brothers everything he knew before the drought took the farm." "You stay in touch with your brothers," Porter shook his head. "James died of cholera when he was 17, on the wagon train west. Michael settled in California somewhere, but I have not heard from him in years. We were never close. Too much competition for too few resources growing up. It made us rivals more than brothers." Delilah reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I am sorry. I know what it is like to lose family." "We make our own families," Porter said, squeezing her hand gently. "At least, that is what I have always believed. Blood matters, but choice matters more." As autumn approached and the brutal heat of summer began to ease, Porter's cabin neared completion. He purchased a small herd of cattle from a rancher who was retiring and moving back east, and spent his days building fences and outbuildings. Delilah resumed her teaching duties as the school year began, but every moment away from the classroom was spent either with Porter or thinking about him. The town had gradually accepted their courtship, though not without continued commentary. Martha Simmons remained openly hostile, making snide remarks whenever she encountered Delilah in town. But others were more supportive, particularly the parents of Delilah's students, who appreciated that their teacher was happy. One evening in late September, Porter invited Delilah to the ranch for dinner. He had been mysterious about the occasion, asking her to dress nicely but refusing to explain why. When she arrived, she found the cabin transformed. Lanterns hung from the porch beams, casting warm golden light, and the table inside was set with real china plates that Porter said he had borrowed from Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house. "What is all this?" Delilah asked, turning to look at him with wonder. Porter took both her hands in his expression serious. "Delilah, we have known each other for almost 2 months now. I know that is not long by most people's standards, but I meant what I said that first day. You are exactly what I have been searching for. You are smart, compassionate, brave, and beautiful. You challenge me to be better, and you support my dreams even when they seem impossible. I cannot imagine my future without you in it." He released one of her hands and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. When he opened it, Delilah gasped. Inside was a simple gold band with a small diamond, modest but lovely. "I know it is not much," Porter said, dropping to one knee, "and I know my prospects are uncertain, but I promise you that I will work every day to build a life we can both be proud of. I will support your dreams just as I hope you will support mine. I will respect your mind and your independence, and I will love you with everything I have for as long as I live. Delilah Kane, will you marry me?" Delilah felt tears streaming down her face, but for once she did not care about composing herself. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Porter, I will marry you." Porter stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that was both gentle and passionate. Delilah melted into him, feeling as if every piece of her life had suddenly clicked into place. This was what she had been waiting for, what she had given up hope of ever finding. A man who saw her completely and loved her not despite her differences, but because of them. They ate dinner in a happy daze, making plans for the future. They would marry in November, once the worst of the ranch work was finished and before winter set in. It would be a simple ceremony at the church, with a small reception afterward. Delilah would continue teaching through the end of the school year, and then decide whether to continue or focus on establishing her medical practice. "I want you to have whatever makes you happy," Porter insisted when Delilah worried about the practicality of her dream. "If that means setting up a clinic here on the ranch, we will make it work. If it means continuing to teach while seeing patients in your spare time, we will make that work too. Your dreams are not less important than mine, Delilah. They are part of what makes you who you are." As the evening drew to a close, and Porter prepared to drive Delilah back to town in his newly purchased wagon, a figure emerged from the darkness near the barn. Both of them tensed, and Porter instinctively moved in front of Delilah. "Easy there, Martin," Harold Simmons's voice drawled from the shadows. "I am not here to cause trouble, just wanted to have a friendly conversation." At night, uninvited, lurking in the dark, Porter's voice was hard. "That does not strike me as particularly friendly, Harold." Harold stepped into the light from the porch lanterns, and Delilah was shocked by his appearance. His clothes were disheveled, and there was a wild look in his eyes that suggested he had been drinking. "I heard through the grapevine that you are planning to marry our little schoolteacher," he said, his words slightly slurred. "Thought I should offer my congratulations, and maybe a word of warning." "We do not need anything from you," Porter said flatly. "Get off my property." "Your property," Harold repeated mockingly. "You have been here 2 months and you think this is your property. Let me tell you something, Martin. This land has a way of chewing up men like you and spitting them out. You do not have the capital or the connections to make it as a rancher, and you sure as hell do not have the right woman. That bookish little schoolmarm is not going to be any help when your cattle die or your well runs dry or the bank comes calling." "You do not know what you are talking about," Delilah said, stepping out from behind Porter despite his protective stance. "And you have no right to come here and insult either of us." Harold's laugh was bitter. "Oh, she has spirit, I will give you that, but spirit does not pay bills, Miss Kane. And neither does reading books or playing at being a doctor. You think you are too good for this town, but the truth is you are just a spinster who got lucky that some fool was willing to overlook your flaws." Porter moved faster than Delilah would have thought possible. One moment he was standing beside her, and the next he had Harold by the front of his shirt, lifting him almost off his feet. "Do not ever speak to her like that again," Porter said, his voice low and dangerous. "You are jealous because I have something you will never have. A woman who chose me freely, not because I had money or status, but because of who I am. Now get out of here before I forget we used to be friends." He released Harold with a shove that sent the other man stumbling backward. Harold caught himself and straightened his clothes, his face twisted with fury. "You will regret this, Martin, both of you. This town does not take kindly to people who think they are better than everyone else. You will learn that lesson soon enough." He turned and walked away into the darkness, and they heard the sound of a horse's hooves moments later. Delilah was shaking, and Porter gathered her into his arms. "I am sorry you had to hear that," he murmured against her hair. "Harold has always been mean when he drinks, but I did not think he would come here." "Why does he hate us so much?" Delilah asked, her voice muffled against Porter's chest. "Because we remind him of everything he is not," Porter replied. "He married Martha for her father's ranch, not because he loved her. He built his success on someone else's foundation, and deep down he knows it. When he sees people trying to build something real through their own efforts, it makes him feel small. "He said we would regret it," Delilah said, pulling back to look up at Porter's face. "What did he mean?" "Nothing," Porter assured her, though she could see the worry in his eyes. "Just empty threats from a drunk. Harold is all talk, he would not actually do anything." But as Porter drove her back to town, Delilah could not shake the feeling of unease that had settled over her. She had seen something in Harold's face tonight, something beyond simple jealousy or drunken belligerence. There had been genuine malice there, a desire to hurt them that went beyond mere words. She shared her concerns with Porter, and he listened carefully before responding. "I will be careful," he promised, "and I will make sure you are safe. But Delilah, we cannot let fear control our lives. We cannot let Harold's bitterness steal our joy. We are going to get married, build our ranch, and live the life we choose. And if Harold tries to interfere, we will deal with it together." Delilah nodded, trying to take comfort from his confidence. But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of her cabin, she could not help but worry. The West was a dangerous place, full of risks and threats, both natural and man-made. And Harold Simmons had just made himself one more danger to navigate. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of activity and emotion. Delilah continued teaching, though it was hard to focus when her mind kept drifting to thoughts of Porter and their future together. She spent her evenings sewing her wedding dress, a simple cream-colored gown that she created from fabric Samuel Wright had helped her order. It was not elaborate, but it was lovely in its simplicity, and when she tried it on in front of her small mirror, she felt beautiful. Porter threw himself into preparing the ranch, working from dawn until dark to get everything ready. He enlarged the cabin slightly, adding a second room that could serve as Delilah's medical office. He built sturdy furniture for their home and purchased supplies for their first winter together. Every time Delilah visited, she was amazed by how much progress he had made, but there were troubling signs as well. Several of Porter's fence posts were knocked down one night, forcing him to spend a full day rebuilding them. One of his cows went missing and was later found dead near Harold's property line, though there was no way to prove foul play. And twice, Porter caught men he did not recognize watching the ranch from a distance. When he rode out to confront them, they disappeared before he could get close. "It is Harold," Porter said grimly when Delilah pressed him about the incidents. "He is trying to intimidate me, maybe hoping I will give up and leave, but it is not going to work." "Should we tell the marshal?" Delilah asked. "And say what?" "That I think Harold is behind some minor vandalism and a possibly natural death of a cow. The marshal would laugh me out of his office. Harold is careful, Delilah. He knows exactly how far he can push without crossing into anything actionable." Delilah wanted to argue, but she knew Porter was right. In a small town like Kelton, accusations without proof were dangerous things. Harold had influence and connections that Porter lacked. Making an enemy of him was risky, but it seemed they already had. Despite these concerns, Delilah refused to let fear overshadow her happiness. She was marrying the man she loved, a man who valued her mind and supported her dreams. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The wedding took place on a crisp November morning, with the sky a brilliant blue and the mountains dusted with early snow. Delilah wore her cream dress and carried a small bouquet of late-season wildflowers that Porter had picked for her. Her glasses were polished to perfection, and her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that had taken her 2 hours to complete. The church was full, which surprised Delilah. She had expected only a handful of people to attend, but it seemed half the town had come, drawn by curiosity if nothing else. Samuel Wright served as Porter's best man, and Mrs. Henderson stood up as Delilah's matron of honor, having befriended her over the past months. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony, his voice booming out over the assembled crowd. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Porter Martin and Delilah Kane. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but with full understanding of the commitment being made. It is a partnership built on mutual respect, love, and shared purpose. As the Reverend spoke, Delilah looked up at Porter and found him gazing down at her with such love and tenderness that she felt tears prick her eyes. This was real. This was happening. She was marrying a man who saw her, truly saw her, and loved what he saw. Do you, Porter Martin, take Delilah Kane to be your lawfully wedded wife? Reverend Thomas asked. Do you promise to love her, honor her, cherish her in sickness and in health for richer or poorer as long as you both shall live? I do, Porter said firmly, his voice clear and strong. And do you, Delilah Kane, take Porter Martin to be your lawfully wedded husband? Do you promise to love him, honor him, cherish him in sickness and in health for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? I do, Delilah replied, her voice trembling with emotion. They exchanged simple gold bands, and then Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, he said with a smile. Porter cupped Delilah's face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had spilled over. Then he kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. The church erupted in applause, and Delilah felt her heart soar. The reception was held in the church hall, with food provided by various townspeople and music supplied by a local fiddler. Delilah was overwhelmed by the generosity shown to them, accepting congratulations and well wishes from people she had barely spoken to before. It seemed that the town had decided to embrace their union, perhaps sensing that Porter and Delilah represented something hopeful and new. Martha Simmons attended, though her congratulations were stiff and clearly forced. Harold did not come, which Delilah considered a blessing. She did not want his presence to mar this perfect day. As the afternoon faded into evening, Porter and Delilah climbed into the wagon and began the journey to their ranch. Their ranch, Delilah thought with wonder. Their home. Supplies and wedding gifts filled the wagon bed, and Delilah's few personal possessions were packed carefully among them. She had given up her rental cabin that morning, closing that chapter of her life for good. The stars were coming out as they arrived at the ranch, and Porter helped Delilah down from the wagon with exaggerated care. "Welcome home, Mrs. Martin," he said, and Delilah laughed with pure joy at hearing her new name. Porter swept her up into his arms and carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing like children. He set her down gently in the main room, which glowed with lamplight and warmth from the stove. Someone, probably Mrs. Henderson, had been here earlier and left fresh flowers on the table and food warming on the stove. "Are you happy?" Porter asked, pulling Delilah close. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "Porter, I spent so long thinking I would always be alone, that no one would ever see past my glasses and my books to the woman underneath. You changed everything." "You were never the problem, Delilah," Porter said seriously. "The problem was everyone else being too blind to see what was right in front of them. I was just smart enough to recognize what I was looking at." They spent their wedding night in each other's arms, discovering the intimacy of marriage and the joy of belonging to another person completely. Delilah had feared that physical closeness might be awkward or disappointing, but Porter was gentle and patient, taking his time to ensure her comfort and pleasure. As she lay beside him afterward, listening to his steady breathing and feeling the warmth of his body against hers, she thought that she had never been happier in her entire life. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, but a joyful one. Delilah continued teaching through the end of the school year, rising early each morning to make the trip into town and returning in the afternoon to help Porter with ranch work. It was exhausting, but she loved every minute. She loved waking up beside her husband, preparing breakfast together, and talking about their plans for the day. She loved coming home to find Porter waiting for her, eager to hear about her students and share his own news about the ranch. Word spread that Delilah had medical knowledge, and people began coming to the ranch seeking help for various ailments. At first it was small things, splinters that needed removing or burns that required treatment. But gradually the cases became more complex. Delilah set a broken arm for a child who had fallen from a tree, delivered a baby when the mother went into labor unexpectedly, and nursed an elderly man through pneumonia. Porter supported her work completely, even when it meant their meals were late or she was too tired for conversation at the end of the day. He built her a proper medical office attached to the cabin, with shelves for her growing collection of medical texts and supplies, and a comfortable examination table he crafted himself. "You are helping people," he would say when Delilah worried that she was neglecting him or the ranch. "That is what you were meant to do. I am proud of you." As spring arrived and Delilah finished her final year of teaching, having decided not to renew her contract so she could focus on her medical practice full-time, they felt their life settling into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch was doing well, with the cattle healthy and the first crop of calves born without incident. They had paid off their initial debts and were beginning to see a small profit, but Harold had not forgotten his threats. Small acts of sabotage continued, though they were spaced far enough apart that it was hard to prove a pattern. A section of fence would be cut, or supplies would go missing from the barn. Porter began sleeping lightly, waking at any unusual sound, and Delilah often found him standing guard in the middle of the night, watching for intruders. "This cannot continue," Delilah said one morning in May, after Porter had spent yet another night patrolling the property. "You are exhausted and it is affecting your work. We need to do something." "Like what?" Porter asked wearily. "I have tried talking to Harold. I have tried ignoring him. Nothing works. He is determined to make our lives difficult." "Then maybe it is time to involve the law," Delilah insisted. "Even if we cannot prove everything, we can at least make our concerns official. If something more serious happens, there will be a record." Porter considered this, then nodded slowly. "You are right. I will ride into town this afternoon and speak with Marshal Cooper. It probably will not help, but at least we will have tried." He went to Kelton that day and returned several hours later with a grim expression. "The marshal listened," he reported, "but he said his hands are tied without proof. He suggested I hire hands to help watch the property, but we cannot afford that right now. He did say he would keep an eye out and would be willing to investigate if anything major happened." "That is something at least," Delilah said, though she felt frustrated by the marshal's limitations. The situation came to a head in early June. Delilah woke in the middle of the night to the smell of smoke. She shook Porter awake, and they both rushed outside to find the new barn, which they had just finished building the previous month, engulfed in flames. Porter ran to try to save the horses, but the heat was too intense. Delilah watched in horror as he disappeared into the smoke, emerging moments later leading two terrified horses. He went back in for the third horse, and Delilah screamed for him to stop, but he was already gone. The barn's roof groaned ominously, and Delilah ran forward without thinking, desperate to reach her husband. Porter emerged just as the roof collapsed, his clothes singed and his face black with soot. He had the third horse with him, but he was coughing violently and could barely stand. Delilah helped him move away from the burning structure, watching helplessly as flames consumed all their hard work. Neighbors arrived, drawn by the light of the fire, and helped contain the blaze so it would not spread to the cabin or other buildings. But the barn was a total loss, along with all the hay and equipment stored inside. Only the horses had been saved, and Porter had been injured in the process. His hands were burned, and he had inhaled enough smoke that he struggled to breathe. Delilah treated his burns with supplies from her medical office, her hands steady despite her fear. "You could have died," she said as she wrapped his hands in clean bandages. "The horses are not worth your life." "They would have died," Porter replied hoarsely. "I could not just let them burn." "And I cannot lose you," Delilah said fiercely. "Promise me you will never do something like that again." Porter pulled her close with his bandaged hands, holding her carefully. "I promise," he murmured. "I am sorry I scared you." As dawn broke, Marshal Cooper arrived with several men. They searched the area around the barn and found evidence that the fire had been deliberately set. Kerosene stains marked the ground near the barn's entrance, and the marshal's expression was grave as he examined them. "This was arson," he said bluntly. "Someone wanted to destroy your property." "Do you have any enemies, Porter?" Porter and Delilah exchanged glances. "Harold Simmons has been harassing us for months," Porter said. "Small things mostly, but it has been constant." "Can you prove it?" the marshal asked. "No," Porter admitted, "but he made threats right after we got engaged. And the timing of these incidents always seems to benefit him somehow." The marshal sighed. "I will question Harold, but unless we can prove he was involved, there is not much I can do. Arson is a serious crime, but accusations without evidence are just as serious." He rode off to speak with Harold, and Porter and Delilah were left to survey the damage. The financial loss was devastating. The barn had represented a significant investment, and the hay and equipment would be expensive to replace. They had insurance, but it would not cover everything. "We will rebuild," Porter said, though Delilah could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "It will take time, but we will do it." Marshal Cooper returned later that day with frustrating news. Harold had an alibi. His ranch hands all swore he had been home all night, and Martha had confirmed his story. There was no evidence linking him to the fire, and without proof, the marshal could not make an arrest. "I believe you," the marshal said quietly to Porter, "but belief is not the same as evidence. My advice is to be vigilant. If Harold is behind this, he may try again, and next time we might be able to catch him in the act." Over the following weeks, Porter and Delilah worked to recover from the fire. The community rallied around them in unexpected ways. Neighbors donated hay and equipment, and several men volunteered their time to help rebuild the barn. Even people who had previously ignored or criticized Delilah came forward with assistance. "Folks around here do not always know how to show it," Samuel Wright said as he helped frame the new barn, "but we take care of our own. You and Porter are part of this community now. What happened to you could have happened to anyone, and we want you to know you are not alone." The support was touching and deeply appreciated, but it did not erase the reality of their situation. Porter's hands healed slowly, making it difficult for him to work at full capacity. The financial strain was considerable, and they had to delay some of their plans for expanding the herd. And always, there was the fear that Harold would strike again, but amidst the difficulty, there was also joy. In July, Delilah realized that she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had waited to be certain before telling Porter. When she finally shared the news, his face lit up with a happiness so pure it brought tears to her eyes. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder coloring his voice. "Delilah, that is incredible." "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly nervous. "I know the timing is not ideal with everything that has happened." "The timing is perfect," Porter assured her, pulling her close. This baby is a sign that we are building a future here, no matter what Harold or anyone else tries to do to stop us. This is our life, Delilah, our family. And nothing is more important than that. As her pregnancy progressed, Delilah found herself torn between excitement and worry. She continued seeing patients, though she limited the more strenuous cases. Porter became even more protective, insisting that she rest more and work less. They spent their evenings planning for the baby, discussing names and preparing a small corner of the cabin that would serve as a nursery. The new barn was completed in August, and a week later, Marshal Cooper arrived with news. "We caught them," he said without preamble. "Two of Harold's ranch hands were arrested trying to cut your fence last night. One of them confessed that Harold has been paying them to cause trouble for you. Said Harold wanted to drive you out of business so he could buy your land cheap." Porter's expression hardened. "Will Harold be charged?" "He is being questioned now," the marshal replied. "With the testimony of his hands, we should have enough to bring charges. This was conspiracy and criminal mischief at minimum, possibly more if we can link him to the arson." The trial took place in September, and the entire town turned out to watch. Harold's ranch hands testified against him, describing months of harassment they had carried out under his orders. One admitted to setting the barn fire, though he claimed Harold had not explicitly told him to do that. He had simply understood that it was what Harold wanted. Harold denied everything, of course, claiming his men were lying to save themselves. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury found him guilty after only 2 hours of deliberation. He was sentenced to 3 years in territorial prison and ordered to pay restitution to Porter and Delilah for their losses. As Harold was led away in chains, he turned to look at Porter and Delilah one last time. His face was twisted with hatred and defeat. "You think you have won," he said. "But you have just made an enemy for life. When I get out, I will finish what I started." "By the time you get out," Porter replied calmly, "we will be so well established that nothing you do will matter. Use your time in prison to learn to let go of your bitterness, Harold. It is destroying you." Martha Simmons left Kelton shortly after the trial, returning to her father's ranch in Wyoming. She sold Harold's property at auction, and Porter was able to purchase some of the adjacent land at a fair price, expanding their ranch significantly. With Harold's threat finally neutralized, and the restitution money providing financial stability, Porter and Delilah were able to focus fully on preparing for their baby and building their future. The autumn passed peacefully, with the ranch thriving and Delilah's medical practice growing steadily. She had become the closest thing Kelton had to a real doctor, and people came from surrounding communities to seek her help. In December, as the first serious snow of winter began to fall, Delilah went into labor. Porter rode frantically to fetch Mrs. Henderson, who had experience as a midwife, while Delilah did her best to remain calm and remember everything she had read about childbirth in her medical texts. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Porter paced outside the bedroom, helpless and terrified, listening to Delilah's cries of pain and Mrs. Henderson's calm, encouraging voice. Finally, as the sun rose on a new day, he heard the strong, healthy cry of a newborn baby. Mrs. Henderson opened the door, her face tired but smiling. "Congratulations, Porter. You have a son." Porter entered the room to find Delilah propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Porter, meet your son." He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had dark hair and was waving one miniature fist in the air. Porter felt something shift in his chest, a surge of love so powerful it was almost painful. "He is perfect," Porter whispered. "You are perfect. Delilah, I cannot believe we created this." They named him Peter James Martin after Porter's father and deceased brother. Little Peter was a healthy, vocal baby who quickly established himself as the center of their universe. Porter proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to walk with Peter when he cried and spending every free moment simply holding his son and marveling at him. Delilah recovered from the birth slowly, and for the first time in her adult life, she allowed herself to truly rest. She scaled back her medical practice temporarily, seeing only emergency cases, and focused on caring for Peter and regaining her strength. Porter hired a young man from town to help with the ranch work, taking some of the burden off himself so he could spend more time with his family. As winter softened into spring, the Martin family settled into their new rhythm. Delilah gradually resumed her medical practice, treating patients while Peter napped or played nearby in a pen Porter had constructed. She found that motherhood and medicine complemented each other beautifully. Her experiences with Peter made her more sympathetic and skilled when treating other children, and her medical knowledge helped her care for her son with confidence. Porter's ranch continued to grow and prosper. The cattle multiplied, and he began to develop a reputation for quality stock and fair dealing. Other ranchers sought his advice, and he formed partnerships and friendships that strengthened his position in the community. The land he had purchased from Harold's estate proved excellent for grazing, and he was able to expand his herd significantly. On their second wedding anniversary, Porter and Delilah stood on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Peter was asleep inside, and for a rare moment they had peace and quiet. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Delilah asked, leaning against Porter's shoulder. "I said a lot of things that first day," Porter replied with a smile. "You will have to be more specific." "You said I was exactly what you had been searching for." "I did say that," Porter confirmed, "and I meant it. I mean it still." "I never told you, but hearing those words changed my life," Delilah said softly. "For so long I had believed that I was too different, too difficult, too much. Everyone in my life had told me that my love of learning and my ambitions were flaws to be overcome, not qualities to be valued. And then you appeared and told me the opposite. You saw my glasses and my books and my dreams, and instead of being repelled, you were attracted. Do you know how rare that is? How precious?" Porter turned to face her fully, cupping her face in his hands the way he had on their wedding day. "You gave me just as much, Delilah. You believed in me when I was just a ranch hand with big dreams and no resources. You saw past my rough exterior and my uncertain prospects to the man I wanted to become. We saved each other, I think. We gave each other permission to be who we really were." They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and Delilah felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. Her life had not turned out the way she had expected. It had turned out better. She had found love, purpose, and a place to belong. She had built a family and a future from nothing but hope and hard work. The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs. The ranch continued to expand, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. Delilah's medical practice grew into a proper clinic, and she even began training a young woman from town who wanted to become a nurse. They had 2 more children, daughters named Dorothy and Deanna, who grew up healthy and loved, encouraged to pursue their interests, whether those interests involved horses or books or both. Peter grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved both ranching and raiding, taking after both his parents in equal measure. He would often accompany Porter on his rounds of the ranch, asking endless questions about the cattle and the land, and then spend his evenings curled up with one of Delilah's medical texts, reading with the same intensity his mother showed. Harold Simmons was released from prison after serving his full sentence, but he never returned to Utah. Rumors said he had moved to California and was working as a ranch hand, his pride broken and his fortune gone. Porter and Delilah never spoke of him, preferring to focus on the future rather than the past. The town of Kelton grew and changed around them. The railroad brought more people and commerce, transforming the rough frontier settlement into a proper town with schools, churches, and businesses. Delilah was instrumental in establishing a small hospital, donating both money and her expertise to ensure that the community would have proper medical care for generations to come. On their 10th anniversary, Porter surprised Delilah by building a larger house to replace the original cabin. It was a beautiful 2-story structure with a proper medical office, a large library for Delilah's ever-growing collection of books, and enough bedrooms for their 3 children and any future additions to the family. "You like it?" Porter asked nervously as he showed her through the finished house for the first time. "Like it?" Delilah repeated, tears streaming down her face as she took in the thoughtful details, the built-in bookshelves, the wide windows that flooded the rooms with light. "Porter, it is perfect. It is everything I never knew I wanted." "You deserve everything," Porter said simply. "You work so hard, helping everyone in this community. You are an amazing mother and wife, and you are still the smartest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. I wanted to build you a house worthy of you." They made love that night in their new bedroom, with the windows open to let in the cool evening breeze and the sound of crickets singing in the grass. Afterward, as Delilah lay in Porter's arms, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From lonely schoolteacher mocked for her glasses and books to successful doctor, beloved wife, and mother, she had traveled further than she ever imagined possible. "What are you thinking about?" Porter murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "How lucky I am," Delilah replied. "How one chance meeting can change everything. If I had not dropped that book that day, if you had been looking the other way, if 1,000 small things had been different, we might never have met." "I do not believe that," Porter said firmly. "I think we were always meant to find each other. Maybe not that exact day in that exact way, but somehow, somewhere, we would have met. Some connections are just inevitable." Delilah smiled in the darkness, loving him even more for his romantic nature that he tried so hard to hide behind practical competence. "Maybe you are right." As the years continued to pass, the Martin family became pillars of the Kelton community. Porter served on the town council and helped mediate disputes between ranchers. Delilah trained 3 more young women in nursing and basic medicine, creating a network of care that extended throughout the region. Their children grew into capable, confident adults who understood the value of both hard work and education. Peter eventually took over management of the ranch, proving to have his father's skill with cattle and his mother's head for business. Dorothy became a teacher like her mother had been, opening a school for girls that emphasized science and medicine alongside traditional subjects. Deanna surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer, one of the first women in the territory to pass the bar exam. As Porter and Delilah grew older, they found deep satisfaction in watching their legacy unfold. The ranch they had built from nothing now employed dozens of people and supported multiple families. The medical clinic had evolved into a full hospital with trained doctors on staff, though Delilah still saw patients occasionally, unable to fully retire from the work she loved. And their children had taken the values they had been taught and used them to make their own marks on the world. On their 30th anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Porter and Delilah sat on the porch of their house and watched the sun set over the mountains, just as they had done countless times before. Delilah's hair was now more gray than brown, and she needed stronger lenses in her spectacles. Porter's face was weathered and lined, his hair completely white, but when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people they had been when they first met. "You have any regrets?" Delilah asked, a question she had never dared to voice before. Porter considered carefully before answering. "I regret the time I wasted before I met you. I regret that I did not find you sooner. But I do not regret a single moment since the day you dropped that medical book, and I was lucky enough to be standing there to pick it up. You told me that day that I was exactly what you had been searching for," Delilah said. "You never told me what you were searching for, though." "What were you hoping to find?" Porter smiled, reaching for her hand and lacing their fingers together the way he had done thousands of times over the past 3 decades. "I was searching for someone who would challenge me to be better than I was. Someone who would not be satisfied with easy answers or conventional wisdom. Someone brave enough to pursue her dreams even when the world told her they were impossible. Someone who could see potential where others saw only failure." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I was searching for you, Delilah. I just did not know it until I found you." Delilah felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy and gratitude. "I spent so long thinking that my glasses and my books and my dreams made me unlovable. That I would have to choose between being myself and being loved. And then you came along and showed me that was never true. You loved me not despite those things, but because of them. You saw them as treasures, not flaws." "They are treasures," Porter insisted. "Everything that makes you who you are is a treasure, Delilah. Your brilliant mind, your compassionate heart, your stubborn determination to make the world better. I am the luckiest man alive because you chose to share your life with me." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their children and grandchildren came out to join them on the porch. There was laughter and conversation, stories being shared and memories being made. Delilah looked around at her family, at the house they had built, at the land that stretched out in all directions, and felt a peace so profound it was almost sacred. This was what she had been meant for. Not just medicine or teaching or ranching, but this. Family, love, legacy. She had been mocked for her glasses and books, told she would never find a man who could appreciate her. But Porter had appeared at exactly the right moment and said the words that had changed everything. "You are exactly what I have been searching for." And in the end, it turned out she had been searching for him too. For a partner who would support her dreams rather than diminish them. For a love built on respect and shared values. For a life that honored both who she was and who she wanted to become. As she sat there surrounded by the fruits of that love, Delilah sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For the book she had dropped. For the cowboy who had picked it up. For every moment of joy and struggle that had brought them to this place. And for the simple truth that she had learned and lived. That being exactly who you are is not a flaw to be hidden, but a gift to be celebrated. The desert wind whispered through the sage, carrying with it the scent of summer and the promise of tomorrow. And Delilah Kane Martin, once mocked for her glasses and books, now beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and healer, smiled into the gathering darkness and knew that her story had turned out exactly as it was meant to be. Years later, when Porter and Delilah were both gone and their story had become legend in Kelton, people would still talk about the schoolteacher and the cowboy who had built an empire on love and determination. They would point to the hospital that bore Delilah's name, to the ranch that still thrived under the management of the Martin family, to the countless lives that had been touched and changed by their example. But more than the material legacy, they had left behind something more valuable. Proof that being different was not a curse but a blessing, that education and ambition in women should be celebrated rather than suppressed, and that true love sees past surface differences to the soul beneath. They had shown that dreams backed by hard work and mutual support could overcome any obstacle, and that choosing to be yourself completely and without apology was the bravest and most worthwhile thing a person could do. The house they had built still stood, passed down through generations of Martins, each adding their own touches but preserving the core that Porter and Delilah had created. In the library, behind glass, sat Delilah's original collection of medical texts, including the worn copy of Gray's Anatomy that had tumbled into the street on that fateful day in August 1882. And visitors who came to see the historic ranch would often stand in that library, running their fingers along the spines of those treasured books, and think about the young woman who had dared to dream bigger than her circumstances allowed. The story of Porter and Delilah Martin became a touchstone for the community, a reminder of what was possible when two people found each other at exactly the right moment and had the courage to build a life on their own terms. Their love story was not without struggle or challenge, but it was real and lasting and true. It was a testament to the power of seeing and being seen, of finding someone who recognized your worth when the rest of the world was blind to it. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all, that somewhere out there, for each person brave enough to be authentically themselves, there existed another person searching for exactly those qualities. That being mocked or dismissed or told you were too much or not enough did not mean you were flawed. It simply meant you had not yet found your person, your place, your purpose. Delilah had found all three on a dusty street in a small Utah town, when a kind cowboy with storm-gray eyes picked up her medical book and told her she was remarkable. And from that small moment of recognition and respect, an entire legacy had grown, a ranch that prospered for generations, a medical tradition that saved countless lives, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried forward the values of hard work, education, and unwavering support for each other's dreams. It was everything Delilah had hoped for in those lonely nights when she was still the mocked schoolteacher with glasses and books and impossible aspirations. It was more than Porter had dared to dream when he was just a ranch hand with nothing but determination and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. Together, they had created something that transcended either of their individual ambitions. They had created a love story that would inspire people for generations to come. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew across the Utah desert and the stars blazed overhead, some people swore they could still feel the presence of Porter and Delilah Martin on the porch of their house, sitting together as they had for so many years, content in each other's company and satisfied with the life they had built. For they had proven what so many doubt, that true love exists, that being yourself is always the right choice, and that sometimes, when you least expect it, the right person will appear and tell you exactly what you need to hear. You are exactly what I have been searching for. Those 8 words had changed 2 lives completely. They had given a lonely schoolteacher hope and a determined cowboy a partner worthy of his dreams. They had created a family, built a legacy, and proven that the most unlikely love stories sometimes have the happiest endings of all. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift Porter and Delilah gave to everyone who knew them or heard their story. The knowledge that love sees what others miss, values what others mock, and creates miracles from moments that seemed ordinary at the time. Their love had started with a dropped book and a kind word, and it had grown into something magnificent and enduring. It was a legacy written not just in land and buildings and businesses, but in hearts and minds, and the collective memory of a community that had witnessed their journey from beginning to end. It was a reminder that we should never give up on ourselves or our dreams, because somewhere out there, someone is searching for exactly what we have to offer. Delilah's glasses and books, once sources of mockery, had become symbols of intelligence and ambition. Porter's simple declaration of her worth had echoed through time, encouraging countless others to see value where society saw flaws. Their love story had transcended their individual lives to become something larger, a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt too different, too difficult, too much. And in the end, that was perhaps their greatest achievement, not the ranch or the hospital or the successful children, but the simple truth they embodied, that being exactly who you are is not something to apologize for, but something to celebrate. That the right person will not want you to change or diminish yourself, but will treasure every quality that makes you unique. It was a message Delilah and Porter had lived every day of their lives together, from that first meeting on a dusty street to their final years, surrounded by the fruits of their love. They had shown everyone around them what was possible when two people truly saw each other, supported each other, and chose to build a life based on mutual respect and shared dreams. Their story was complete, their ending happy, their legacy secure. The cowboy and the schoolteacher had found what they were searching for in each other, and in doing so, they had created something beautiful that would endure long after they were gone. It was a love story for the ages, proof positive that fairy tales could happen even in the harsh reality of the Wild West, and that happily ever after was possible for those brave enough to reach for it. And so the story of Porter and Delilah Martin came to its close, not with an ending but with a continuation. For love like theirs never truly ends. It lives on in the hearts of those they touched, in the institutions they built, in the values they passed to their children. It lives on in every person who hears their story and finds courage to be themselves, to pursue their dreams, to believe that somewhere out there, someone is searching for exactly what they have to offer. The glasses and books that had once marked Delilah as strange had become her greatest assets, tools she used to build a life of purpose and meaning. The cowboy who saw past society's judgments had found his perfect partner and built a legacy that would outlast them both. Together, they had proven that love conquers all, that being true to yourself is always right, and that the best stories have the happiest endings. Their life together was complete, their love fulfilled, their purpose achieved. And as the sun set over the Utah desert one last time on their story, it rose on all the lives they had touched and changed, carrying forward the light of their example into future generations. It was, in every sense, a perfect ending to a beautiful story. A story of love, acceptance, perseverance, and the magnificent things that can happen when two people find each other at exactly the right moment, and have the courage to build a life that honors who they truly are.